Welcome to Causing the Effect, a podcast focused on the exploration of your mind, body, and spirit.
Yo, what is going on, Causing the Effect community? I am lucky enough to be joined by somebody I consider a friend now, Doctor of Philosophy, man of many talents, Frank Scalambrino. Frank is the man. There's no one I'd rather be talking to now, to be honest, particularly about authenticity, because Frank, I really think you're like one of the most authentic people I've met in my life, to be honest with you.
Well, thank you, Scott. I really appreciate it. And I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for having me back on the show.
Of course, man. Me and Frank did an episode a couple months ago on authenticity. Got cut short a little bit. I was dealing with some craziness with my mother, but now we're back in it. We're going to jump right into it. Frank, give us a little overview of what we're going to be going through and all that good stuff.
Sure. So the idea is that I guess it was pretty much exactly a year ago. I published a 2-volume set on existentialism. It's called "What is Existentialism?" And after a really, really long time, I just kind of kept comparing these different existential philosophers, sort of stepping backward, trying to find a point of view from which they could be categorized. And the idea is that I was able to come up with these 7 principles of existentialism. And so you've got the constitutional principles and the actualization principles. And the idea is that authenticity, which is what we're focusing on today, authenticity is one of the actualization principles. So if you want to think of it in terms of how the constitutional principles and the actualization principles relate together, you could say that we exist, and by existing, it's like we're thrown into the world. And when you find yourself thrown into the world, there's a sense in which it has these constitutional principles. It's mysterious. Existence has the quality of mine to it, which this sense in which it's always already the case that I have to make my own decisions and guide my own existence, and that ties right in with this next principle of freedom, that I am free in the sense that I must make my own choices. And then all of these principles together constitute anxiety, or that they bring about a kind of anxiety about being in the world. And so it seems like the existentialists or the existential philosophers, even Sartre, they all suggest a kind of way of relating to that anxiety. And it took a very, very long time, but that one sentence right there, I feel like that one sentence actually states it all. And that is that authenticity, integrity, and sincerity can be understood as the resolution of the anxiety of mindness regarding freedom and mystery. So anyway, so that's kind of where we're at. So authenticity then, and I've later on, there's other slides. There's only 6 slides and that I have put together here, but as one of the slides suggests, that authenticity, the reason why authenticity gets so much more attention than the other actualization principles is because authenticity is about presence, and authenticity is about the present, whereas integrity is more of a principle about the past, and sincerity is more of a principle about the future.
Wow, that's a really I didn't put those together. I did put together that the actualization principles is more like how we should live our lives in a way. And you're saying that integrity is looking into the past.
Yeah. So the idea would be that when you I would say that it's kind of a relation to the past. So the idea is that I'm existing, and when by existing, Heidegger is really the one who emphasizes this the most. But by existing, I am being in time, and by being in time, I have a relation to my past being, and I have a relation to my future being. And so when I relate to my past being, and this comes up in existential psychotherapy all the time, is that when I relate to my past being, I want to relate to my past being in such a way that I can integrate my past selves toward a kind of wholeness, so that I am one being in time. this kind of wholeness, for Heidegger, it would be a revelation. It brings about a revelation of one as being, being in the world. So the idea is something like this, right? You could put it like this. You could say that when you're able to accomplish these self-actualizations, whenever you're able to reach these actualization principles, it, that very moment, Heidegger calls it the moment of vision, but that very moment is one in which your true self is revealed to you. So you could say something like, what I would say is something like, it is the revelation of your transcendental self. It is the revelation of you as being in the world. Instead of, so for example, instead of, and you can see at the bottom of this slide, the idea that, so, most of us, it's like, we're born, I'd say probably all of us are born, but so we're born, and we think of ourselves in terms of however, we grew up, and however our parents talk to us about ourselves and these kinds of things. And so these existential philosophers would say that's a kind of worldly identity, right? So I think of myself in terms of the time in which I grew up, the space in which I grew up, those kinds of things. But at some point on this sort of spectrum or continuum between the world and the self, there's a sense in which, as I self-actualize, I'm actually pulling away from the world. I'm moving away from the world. I'm sort of, you could think of it as sort of surging your will to power. That is the transcendental self. And so as that power surges, you come to see yourself as yourself, instead of seeing yourself as in terms of the world. See yourself in terms of being.
Wow, that is heavy stuff. And when you said that, you said before, like, you have an insight or revelation to your true self. Now, when you're saying that, I'm assuming that it's not like the full self actualization. It's more like a piece. You're almost seeing a piece of yourself in that insight or that piece. It's not like you're getting everything at once. It's more like just like uncovering a piece of the onion. Am I accurate in saying that?
That's a great question, Scott. That's a great question. So wow, it's okay. So
because the way I'm thinking about it, Frank, is like, I was leading up to this question of, can you ever actually arrive at full self-knowledge? Or is it like you get to this, you have this insight, and then you're constantly defining and redefining the basis of new understandings against the background of the world and the demands that you've put on yourself and the reality?
Great question. So what I would say is, what is being revealed. So you could think of it as almost like, you could think of it almost as like the sun and the light from the sun shining into, we got Plato's cave sort of bouncing around here a little bit, but you've got the light of the sun shining into some kind of a vessel or some kind of a space. And the idea is that when we look at what is illuminated by the sun, when we look at what is illuminated by the light, we tend to identify ourselves with that. But this revelation is a revelation of the light, not what the light is showing. So the idea is that your question is a great question, and it points to a really, really heavy metaphysical question. And that metaphysical question is, how does your true self relate to time? Like, are you in time? So we could put it like this. I don't want to get too far into a mind body kind of split, but we could talk in terms of mind body just to kind of make it a little bit move a little faster. You could say something like, if it's the case that I have being whenever I am not incarnated in this body, that being, how does that being relate to time in the way that I experience time in this body?
Mm.
So you could almost say something like, when I relate to the past, so I have my being, and when I relate to the past of my being in the world, it's almost as if what you're doing is you're learning to take hold of this incarnation, right? But the way that you're learning to take hold of this incarnation is not in terms of a worldly anchor point, but it's in terms of what they would call a transcendental anchor point. So the reason that, and I'll just say one last thing, is that every time you hear the word transcendental, you always want to think of this phrase, and the phrase is condition for the possibility of. So the idea is that the transcendental self is the condition for the possibility of this worldly identity that I understand myself in terms of. So it's not but these are magnificent questions, Scott. I mean, they're magnificent questions. But so when we're talking about this revelation of my true self, of my transcendental self, it's not so much that I can have any kind of knowledge about that self other than that it is. So it's it truly is a revelation of the being that is the condition for the possibility of my being in the world.
Mm.
But I'm still in the world. I'm still in the
Yeah.
world when I have this revelation. I'm still in the world when I have this moment of vision. But having that moment of vision changes my relation to being in the world. So going full circle here to where we jumped off, is that you could say that's what authenticity is that when I'm in the moment, when I'm in the present moment, what determines my being in that moment is being, and not the world. If by the moment we say every moment is being in the world. So if being here, being wherever you are, if that is being in the world, then the idea is that in this moment, what determines my being could be being, or it could be the world. And when it's being that determines my being, then we would say that is authentic being.
Got it. And this
So it's authentic being in the world. Yeah.
compare.
And when I can integrate myself across time, then that's the actualization of integrity. And when I have an awareness of this, and I relate to the future, and from that point of view, or from that point of departure, then that's whenever we actualize sincerity. So that they're all sort of part of the wholeness.
Gotcha. Wow. I love this shit, Frank. Wow. That's fantastic. And I
Thank you.
guess that everybody's, I love what everything Frank is saying. I just have some questions that I'm playing a little bit of devil's advocate here. I guess
This is great. Yeah, please do.
Part of this, there's limits to our human perception, right? Thought and then self-knowledge. And I guess even for some, it could play some deceiving yourself in a way. And I guess that is because there's human judgments and attitudes. Our human judgments and attitudes are based on the interpretation of perceptions of reality, rather than on the interpretation of reality itself, which I think kind of ties into what you were saying. So my question to you is, how do you minimize those limits of your human perception, of your thought and your self-knowledge, and even some self-deception?
Yeah, that's excellent. I can hear several questions in there. So I think a great starting point to answer that question would be to say something like, and this brings to mind ideas of Carl Jung's idea of individuation. So you could say something like, to exist or to be in the world is to always already have been thrown into the world. And so what that means is that I always like to use the metaphor of I have, this individuation, this individual existence can be understood in terms of like these are the cards that I've been dealt, to put it like that, right? So these are the, whatever. So where I was born, when I was born, to whom I was born, other things that are going on in the world, my genetics, all that kind of stuff, right? So you could think about all those sorts of things as the cards that you've been dealt. And so the idea is that you can't change the cards that you've been dealt, but what we're trying to do is play them. I'm a little reluctant to say the best possible way, because best brings in this idea of the world, right? So right immediately we start thinking like, well, does that mean, making as much money as possible? What's that mean? But I think that some people would say that what it means is playing your cards in such a way as that you come to the revelation of what you really are and who you really are. And that is a revelation of being as opposed to worldliness.
Wow.
I don't know if I answered your question.
No,
I feel like okay.
You did. You're doing, Frank. You're great. I know these took like days to write, so I'm asking you not easy stuff. I was like, this took all my energy. Don't think I'm just throwing these together.
Yeah, no, that's okay.
Because this, in a poll, it's like being true and honest to oneself, right? But then once you throw in, I guess you would say that if you're being true and honest while you're being, that's easy. That's what we're trying to do here. That's what the authenticity is. But what happens when you bring in others and you bring in the world? Like, is there an internal authenticity and is there an external authenticity? The word that I was trying to, I was journaling about this, and what popped up was like unbiased self-awareness. Is that an accurate thing to say? Like being unbiased self-awareness in the present moment for me, like being unbiased towards me, towards who I am, all this stuff, just being unbiased and looking at myself as deep and as real as I possibly could.
I like that a lot. Yeah. I like that a lot.
Fair.
I think that's a great way to put it. I personally really like Nietzsche's way of referring to this as will to power. So this idea that like when, or we had talked last time a little bit about the Buddhist stuff, and so you could say something like Suzuki, when Suzuki talks about, he says, when you are sitting in the middle of your problem, what is more real to you, you or your problem? And I think he's saying the exact same thing, right? So if you think of that in terms of being in the world, the problem is a problem in terms of the world, even if it's a problem of your own mortality, because we're mortal beings anyway. So I mean, you've got that problem from the very beginning. It just might be more imminent, right? So the idea is that when I hear your paraphrase there, that bias, I hear bias as being, or I hear bias as worldliness. I hear bias as using worldly categories to identify myself.
Yes. And did Nietzsche, and this is me just asking, could be a different
yeah, please do. Yeah.
Did Nietzsche's view of this will to power, did it change from when he started his work to at the end, his idea of will of power, from your perspective?
From my perspective, it was always there. It was always there. And I think that you can see it. You can go back even to the birth of tragedy out of the spirit of music, and you can see it. You can see it in that work. Even it's just that it's primarily expressed in terms of Dionysus, or the Dionysian worldview, or the Dionysian worldview. Yeah, but I do think that it's there, and the reason that I think that it's there, and forgive me, this is like, let me plug this idea a little bit. I just love this idea, but the reason that it's there is because all of these guys knew Kant. They all understood Kant, right? Yeah. So that's why, forgive me if I can just bounce back here just for a quick second.
Yeah, and for everybody who's listening, if you jump to the YouTube channel and check out this episode, I'm going to put, this is all up here. So you see Frank, and Frank got
awesome.
The genealogy of existentialism up. And basically everything I learned is partially from Frank, unfortunately. I got to do more to become more worldly, but Frank, you're a pretty good teacher, dude.
Thank you, Scott. I appreciate that. Thank you. Well, and I'm not, I say in all humility. I mean, I'm not patting myself on the back here. It was a tremendous amount of work to get to this point. And in truth, one of the things that was so difficult was going against some of my teachers, right? I mean, I can't tell you how many teachers that I had who said things like, there is no answer to this question, right? There's no answer to this question. Like, it's a waste of time basically to try to find an answer to this question. But that didn't stop me from continuing to read these philosophers. And I just, as I'm reading these philosophers, even Sartre, in my opinion, Heidegger is very difficult because Heidegger is very heavy, and Heidegger's thinking, it's like it spans time in this way that it's like, in order to follow Heidegger's thought, to follow him down these pathways, as it were, in order to follow Heidegger's thought, you really have to sort of train your mind to be able to hold a thought for a very long period of time. So I feel like, it's a tremendous amount of focus and concentration. So I feel like Heidegger is a very heavy thinker, but Sartre is very difficult to read. Sartre is very difficult to understand. And so anyway, and then you have these guys, explicitly, in essence, disagreeing with each other. Sartre, Heidegger saying that Sartre's philosophy really is junk, is just garbage. The idea is that it lends itself to this interpretation that there is no universal point of view. You can't call these guys all existential philosophers. You can't, these people all existential philosophers. You can't, there's no such thing as existentialism. But anyway, but there really is. There really is. And even if you look at Sartre in terms of the actualization principles, all of the existential philosophers have the same actualization principles. They understand them all in the exact same way. That's why Sartre's idea of bad faith is exactly like, I mean, there's people out there that could nitpick at this, but in its essence, it is exactly like inauthenticity in Heidegger. In terms of constitutional principles, they may read things a little bit differently, but the idea is that all of it was made possible by Immanuel Kant. And I say that not because I get some kind of, and forgive me, Scott, let me just real quick.
Go.
It's
please,
like,
just do it.
It's like I say this not because I get some sort of prize. Right? Nobody's up and saying that this all comes from Immanuel Kant. I'm saying this because I think it's the most helpful thing to say, right? I mean, so the idea is that if you want to, you could take 20 years like I did to try to figure this out, or you could just cut right to the chase. And if you want to cut right to the chase, you got to go understand, at least at a basic level, what Immanuel Kant is saying, because all of these philosophers are transcendental philosophers. And so you've got to be able to try to obtain the transcendental point of view as quickly as possible. And then once you have the transcendental point of view, all of this becomes illuminated. You can see all of it then suddenly. So yeah.
And for the people who are a little bit layman, and including myself, that transcendental view, I know, like you said, it took a while to figure. How would you just summarize this transcendental view?
So, and you actually said it, you actually said it just a moment ago. So, and I added this little blurb here at the bottom. So, this idea that subject object is really internal to the world and the self, right? So the world and the self is bigger than subject and object. And I think that for whatever reason, this is a big stumbling block for people. I can't say exactly why it was for me also. I think it revolves around ambiguity regarding the word subject. But in either case, the idea here is that if you understand that the world, that this distinction between world and self is a bigger distinction than the distinction between the subject and the object, then the idea is that you no longer have a subjective point of view. It is possible to transcend the subjective point of view and get to the transcendental point of view. And that's what we're talking about here.
Very, very cool stuff, Frankie. Awesome.
and this is Maslow, and this is the idea from an empirical point of view. So, from an empirical point of view, we would say that in terms of my bodily experiences, what sort of things do I need to be able to self-actualize? But when we speak philosophically about what is it that is actualizing, right? What is self-actualization? And from the point of view of coming to an awareness of this through thought or through the use of thinking, then that's whenever we start talking about the transcendental point of view. And so you can see how they relate to the constitutional principles here. So if we're asking the question, what is authenticity? And then we say, well, authenticity is about the present moment. So authenticity is a kind of virtue. I like to use these Aristotle terms, like it's a virtue of being in the world. So just like virtue in the sense of like being a virtuoso at playing an instrument, right? So at being this individual, at being this, at playing the cards that I've been dealt. To become virtuous, to be a virtuoso at playing the cards that I've been dealt, is this sense in which I am able to occupy the present moment in terms of being, to determine my being in the present moment in terms of being instead of in terms of worldliness. This doesn't mean that it's completely exclusive of or something like that. I mean, that's a different question. That's a question of the metaphysics of what is the world, which is a very, very difficult question in my opinion. But if we're just talking about authenticity, then the question is that, well, I can understand how I am in the present moment pertains to the virtue of authenticity. And so if you think of authenticity then in terms of so we just talked about it in terms of time. If you think about it in terms of these constitutional principles, then you can say something like, well, and you pointed this out just a moment ago when you said, in terms of wholeness, I can't see my entire existence all at once. Right. So, I mean, all I can see is what I can remember of it right now. All of that involves a kind of selection, right? I have to choose what to focus on. So to the existential philosophers, that means that my existence exceeds my consciousness. I exist, and that existence is the condition for the possibility of consciousness, right? I can exist without being conscious, but I can't be conscious without existing, at least, at this point of embodiment, So the idea then is that in what is authenticity then in terms of this mysteriousness, like being in relation to the abyss, so to speak, is that I'm able to see my own being and my own existence that in a way that's not eclipsed by the world. So I'm still in the world, I'm still operating in the world, I'm still making worldly choices, but I mean, Kierkegaard and all of these philosophers, existential philosophers, would think of it as a kind of despair to have fallen too far into the world. If I understand myself in terms of the world solely, then I have, for example, according to Kierkegaard, I have fallen into a kind of despair. So worldliness doesn't eliminate the mystery of being.
And I do believe I think Jesus said it, be in the world, but not of it.
Yep.
Very, very interesting, Frank. Now this, you created these principles?
Well, I created the organization of them, I suppose. But I guess, I mean, my experience of this, honest to goodness, my experience of this was just that I just kept reading these philosophers over and over and over again. And as I'm reading them, suddenly I'm like, well, these two philosophers are talking about the same thing, right? They don't call it the same thing, but they're talking about the same thing. can I find that, really it's an idea, it's not a thing, but can I find that idea in these other philosophers, right? And then if I find what I think is that idea in these other philosophers, then what I do is I ask myself, well, the way that they relate to that idea, that relation, let's go back over to these other philosophers and see how that relation compares to the relation over here. And the idea is that eventually, the bigger idea is that eventually you start to see that there, you know, I'm reluctant to see the academy gets hung up on certain terms, right? So I'm reluctant to use the word system, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm reluctant to use the word system, but just for ease of conversation here, I would say that it does, you know, when you start to see these, not so much the ideas, but the relations between the ideas, what it does is it illuminates a system. It starts to illuminate a system. And so if nothing else, what you can do is you can systematically relate then to these philosophers. You know, does Sartre change his mind? Of course he does. You know, like, you know, so you can identify different phases in Sartre's philosophy. But when Sartre was an existentialist proper, you can, when he's doing existentialism, not Marxism or something else, you can see that he's doing existentialism by relating to these ideas, and the way that he relates to these ideas, those same relations are found across the board, right? They're just found across the board. So for example, inauthenticity is bad faith, and inauthenticity is falling into the world. So you know, so being in the world is a kind of Heideggerian phrase. The phrase comes from Martin Heidegger, but the idea is that it's already radically present in Kierkegaard. In fact, some people would say that Heidegger took it from Kierkegaard. So when Kierkegaard is saying that, so for Kierkegaard, the difference is that you could say there's worldliness and then there's one's relation to God, right? And so the idea is that when you have turned away from God, we're doing Kierkegaard now, when you've turned away from God, and you could say that God is, if you wanted to talk in these kinds of Kierkegaardian terms, you could say that God is the condition for the possibility of all being. That if God is the source of all being, then the idea is that, again, it's like the sun illuminating this space. And so when I'm looking at what is being illuminated, I'm looking at the world. And when I understand myself in terms of the world, I have somehow fallen away from my source. Right. And so, but when I turn back to the sun, when I recognize that, and you know, this metaphor is, of course, is Plato's metaphor, but when I turn back to the sun, then I'm relating to the source of my being. And when I relate to the source of my being, for Kierkegaard, that is the only true being that there is, right? That's the only true self that you have. So any worldly understanding of yourself is always already despair for Kierkegaard. And so therefore despair, and Kierkegaard even goes so far as to say that it's demonic, with a D-E instead of D-A-I. But so when Kierkegaard says that it's demonic, what he's really saying is that it's inauthentic. What he's really saying is that you are in bad faith. And so you see this across all of the thinkers. Yeah.
And that was going to be one of my questions for you. It's like, for the person saying, well, fine, why do I got to be authentic? Why do I have to have integrity? Why do I have to have sincerity? The existentialist, which, by the way, yeah, that was another thing. The existentialist arguments bear a striking resemblance on the views of authenticity introduced in Platonic dialogues. That was another question that we'll talk about. But it's a great question. No, these are great questions. These are great questions, Scott. So the idea is something like, you don't have to be authentic. I mean, you could do it's you're condemned to be free, as Sartre would say, right? So you're it's your life to do with what you will. Not to sound like Aleister Crowley, but yeah, it's your life to do with what you will. So yeah, I think that, you know, Heidegger would say that it's a kind of calling. There's this great little phrase Dr. Lee used to always emphasize this in the class, es ruft mich, that it calls me. And so what you could say is something like, and there's a sense in which this really quickly jumps into
Platonic metaphysics, right? So it's like to do the existentialism is to kind of be right up against the Platonic metaphysics without doing the Platonic metaphysics, but the Platonic metaphysics is absolutely in the background there. But so the idea is that I think you could say that being, because being in the world, or because being here is always already being in the world, you could say that that being naturally calls to us.
Yes.
Right. So you could almost say something like, and I believe that it is the same experience for everyone, insofar as they are being in the world, right? But you could say that being calls to us. So it's almost as if your true being is calling to you. And even Gabriel Marcel talks about this a lot as well. This idea that when you're dissatisfied, so Heidegger has an entire book that talks about boredom, right? And he's like, what is boredom, right? And he says that, well, boredom is a sign. And again, I mean, I could just keep saying the same thing over and over again, but he's pulling this from Kierkegaard as well. But boredom is a sign that you're looking at the world, right? That you're determining your being in the moment by looking at the world, instead of determining your being in the moment by looking at being. And so I think that the idea is that another way to say that exact same thing is to say that being is calling to you, because when you turn away from being, that's when you begin to experience these things like despair, right? So even when Kierkegaard says that it's kind of demonic, I mean, even if there's an attractive pull from the world, and even if you want to characterize that as demonic, I think some people would just say the whole thing is divine anyway, right? But this sort of divine comedy, as it were, right? But even if you want to characterize that pull as demonic, there's still some sort of sense in which harmony, the experience of harmony, comes from turning toward being. And so I think that relation of disharmony and harmony, it can be understood as a kind of call. I'm being called to being.
Yes. And I would just give my personal experience of this. Is like, I would
Please
say
do.
I lived worldly for my 20s, and even now a little bit, we're rocking and rolling. And like, yes, there's definitely despair there. And like, my part to you is, Frank, it's like, how would you, people who are new on this journey of the transcendental world and being, and that are kind of pulled, they're torn. And I would say I agree with Kierkegaard. I do think there's that, like, that demonic side of me, that darkness, that shadow, whatever you want to call it. Like, how do you balance, like, okay, I used to be like, I feel like for, in layman's world, it'd be like I was walking unconsciously in my 20s. You're just doing stuff. You're not even realizing what you're doing. And then I'm here, and I love being, but now I'm like, I'm still in despair, because I see both sides, and I want to get towards my being more, and I want to let go of that world, or detach, or, any of the Buddhist words you could use there. What would you say to that?
Super heavy question, super heavy.
Yeah.
So I hear three thoughts in there that I think really need to be emphasized. And it's so interesting maybe that so much of the second talk is pointing toward the ancient philosophers. It's fascinating to me that that's happening. But so the three thoughts that are emphasized there, I think, would be Plato's idea, or what's called his allegory of the charioteer, or the allegory of the chariot. And then the second thought would be Aristotle on happiness. And then the third thought would be just to re-emphasize this distinction that we want to think in terms of self and world instead of subject and object. And so just real quick, if I could just run through those, and then that would answer your question. Is that so the first thought is that actually, let's start with Aristotle. So we'll start with the second thought and then go to the first. But so the idea is that Aristotle's definition of the word that Aristotle uses that is translated as happiness. And this is, there's really just two words that really always kind of come up that the English misses the ancient Greek. And those two words are happiness and love, oddly enough, right? But so the Greek term for happiness is eudaimonia. And in the middle there, you get the word daimon with a daimon. So so if you do want to think in terms of the demonic versus the daimonic, then you can almost think of the demon as low and the daimon as high. So the daimon is characterized as kind of like an angel, right? So you've got the angels and you got the demons, and then you've got this notion of psychomachia, or machia being war. So you've got this like sort of spiritual war that's taking place, and I'm only following this idea out. I'm just following this idea out because in order to answer the question, right? So
Sure.
I'm not trying to push any sort of anything, right? I'm just answering the question. So if you think of this kind of spiritual war taking place with the individual being, then the idea is, and if that's just a part of what constitutes you as being in the world, right? To be human is to be in the middle of this war, so to speak. If that's the case, and I think that all of these guys would be okay with that, or at least all these ancient guys would be okay with that. If that's the case, then happiness, eudaimonia, just like the prefix "eu" at the beginning of euthymic. But the eudaimonia would be to. So Aristotle's definition of happiness would be to no longer be at war with yourself, right? So the question is that. If I think this primarily shows up in terms of self-talk. This primarily shows up in terms of internal dialogue, right? And so the idea is that if I want to be happy, we're doing Aristotle here, right? But it's in the background of existentialism. Because I think of existentialism as a character ethics. If I want to be happy, then I have to find a relation that, and when I say relation, I mean relation to my being, a relation to being in the world. I have to find a relation that stops that war, right? That psychomachia. So the idea is that in terms of the existentialists, we could say that that itself is also a call, right? And I think Christianity picks up with this in terms of, you could say something like, what is the point of existing in the world? What is the point of this embodiment? What is the point of this incarnation? And you could say something like the realization of our relation to God. And I don't think any of that is outside this system, this structure that's being illuminated when you think about this. But so in other words, to be in the world is to be called. How am I called? I'm called. It's my dissatisfaction that calls me, right? I'm called through my suffering. I'm called through my pain, right? So the idea is that, I'm called through my boredom, right? So it's just naturally the case that if I'm constitutionally in the middle of this war, and if I turn toward the world, right, then I suffer more. So by turning away from the world, I turn toward being. I turn toward the true being. So I think you could say that it's naturally built into being in the world, being human, that we are called to turn toward being, and that by doing that I become happy, right? That by doing that I lessen my suffering. So I think constitutionally you could think of it like that. And then does that make sense?
Yes. No, I'm
okay.
I'm with you.
Okay. So then if we go from Aristotle to Plato, this idea of the chariot, you could say that so there's happiness, right? So you could think of being happy, but being happy is more of almost like an experiential, everyday kind of empirical kind of point of view, right? Like I'm just talking about, am I arguing with myself all the time, right? Like, the example I used to give was that sometimes, I used to have a bit of a temper. I suppose I still do, but it's not as bad as it used to be. Let's put it that way. But I'd wake up in the morning, and sometimes if I was really upset, right, I would just be fighting with myself. I mean, just fighting with myself. But it's like that idea of I used to run these anger management groups, and one of the things that I always thought was just so excellent that would come out of these therapy groups was that we would talk about how anger really is like drinking poison. Don't get me wrong. There is such a thing as righteous anger. Like sometimes you need to be angry. Sometimes you should be angry, right? But anger serves a purpose. It serves a function, right? But anger that is misplaced anger, or anger at the wrong time, right? So anger at the wrong time and in the wrong place is just like really like drinking poison and hoping that it harms the other person, right? So it's like you wake up in the morning and you're just standing around recounting all of the wrongs, right? Like, all these people are terrible, look at how they've harmed me, look at whatever. And then you say to yourself, hey, but I just want to drink a cup of coffee here. I just want to enjoy my cup of coffee. It's like whatever's going on in my mind here. It's like, hey, let me just drink this cup of coffee. I just want to taste it. I want to focus on the taste of this coffee, right? And then after I drink this cup of coffee, you can torment me all day long if you want. You know what I mean? Like, but anyway, so empirically, that's what's going on with Aristotle. But then I think the metaphysical point is what happened is Plato. And so the idea here is that, but once I start to realize that I can take control of that process, right? Once I start to realize that I can take hold of my own most potential, like I have the potential in this moment to be thinking, I'm free. I have the potential in this moment to be thinking about whatever I want. I can put my mind on whatever I want. But if I can't do that, right, because I'm being carried by the world in some way, I'm not carrying the world is carrying me, so to speak, right? Like, so it's like, then the idea is that I want to try to regain control of it. I want to try to not allow it to just drag me wherever it wants to drag me. And so the idea is that with Plato, once you start to realize that you can steer this thing, right? Once you start to realize that you can drive it, then Plato, if I could put it in terms of a question, I think Plato wants to say something like, well, where can we go with this, right? Like what can you actually see? If you can take hold of your being in your own way, then what can I direct that being toward? And for Plato, it seems to me, with this allegory of the chariot or the charioteer, is that it becomes possible to gain greater awareness of the source of your being in the world. So that Aristotle, Plato, and then the idea is just that, like, but you got to get out of this, but I say you, I mean all of us, right? Is that, but you got to get out of this like subjective objective way of thinking, because it's bigger than that, right? So it's really more of a I find myself always already in it, right? I'm already in it, right? I'm in it with others. Yes, I'm in it with a sort of karmic flow, right? There's a flow. There's a series of events that have already taken place that are influencing this event, the event of now. The series of events is influencing the experience of every now. The Buddhists, I think, are best with that. It's this karmic flow. So I have to cope with the karma. So, but at the same time, but I'm in it, right? So I'm in it with the karma. I'm in it with the others. And there's a way in which, when I'm in it, I can change my relation in it. And when I change my relation in it, that's whenever I start to realize the truth of, what it is, the truth of its being, the truth of what it means to be here. Yeah.
It comes back to that being, because I'm dying laughing at when you were angry, because like I wake up sometimes, I would say more this summer than most, and I'm upset about I hate when people like, oh, you're we're talking about authenticity. It's funny, like in today's world, we say, you're a real one, or being real, right? And I always get so upset about how people are not real. So I'll sit and I'm like, just want to meditate. I just want to focus and just open it. And this is like what I get upset about. But by what you just said, by simply wanting and like getting more aggravated that the world or people are not real or inauthentic or whatever that be, I'm becoming more worldly and putting myself in more despair. And I should bring myself back towards being.
That's perfect.
Got
Perfect.
Got
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. No, because I don't know. You haven't said
yeah.
you haven't said Socrates yet. And I don't even know if he falls into this, but like Socrates, I read something that he said about, man will go on imitating even though he doesn't know the good or bad qualities of anything, but only what appears to be good, basically. And the majority of people know nothing. And like, it's just always because I'll tell you what happened, Frank. Like last week,
please do.
We're on the train last week, and there's I'm with my company.
Mhm.
So everybody's in New York, and people who are in New York and know how the subway is, it's been a little wild. And I don't know, Frank, there's just something in me. They call me Superman out on the team. Because like when somebody is out of line, I can't tell you why. I can't help myself.
Good for you.
And like these 3 African-American gentlemen come on the train, they whip their dicks and they start peeing. And what does everybody do? Everybody, Frank, it's nuts. Everybody in my company, they're all nice, normal. Everybody's normal on the train besides me. I guess I'm the crazy one too. Everybody just puts their head down. And for me, I'm like, this is malevolence. This is evil. I will not stand for it. I will not yield, I believe is what Socrates said before they killed him. And that's just how I feel. And I can't tell if I'm right or wrong. If I'm trying to be a tough guy, if that's the ego, that's like something I could feel like, why do you have to do that? And I'm like, I don't know. But I will not, I won't, there's not a question. You have to stop it. And it wasn't a fight. It was just like, guys, you're not doing this here. And nothing bad, no fight. These guys were drunk or on drugs, whatever. And this is like something because I feel like I'm living in the world, but like not everybody will speak up for what is good. And every time you don't speak up for what is good, you are creating more of a malevolent place to live.
Well said. Well said. I really like that. And I would go so far as to say something like, it's interesting because I recently had a similar, I'll just put it that way. I recently had a very similar experience. And what I found was so interesting to me was that in the conversation with this person suggested to me that I was trying to intimidate them, even though they, I'm on my property. They come over to me. They're the ones, using profanity. They're clearly elevated, and trying to escalate a situation. Right. And what was interesting to me was the same thing that you had just said, was that, I was like, hey, let's just get clear on what we're talking about here. You know what I mean? I mean, like, because, this is a great, I take this from the existential psychotherapist, right? This idea, and really coming from Carl Rogers as well, but this idea in the, forgive me, I'm just name dropping, plugging these folks, but their names for the people who are watching, they can look these fellas up if they want. I would Google the Gloria tapes, but Fritz Perls of Gestalt therapy, but this idea that this person's relation to what's real, to what's happening, is incongruent, right? It just doesn't match up with the reality of the situation. You know what I mean? Like the subway's not a toilet. You know what I mean? Like, what do you? I mean, so it shouldn't be a toilet. So anyway, so it's like, well, why, what point of view do you have in regard to this situation? Because clearly you're seeing this situation in an incorrect way. And I do think that what happens is that sometimes I think that this is why things resort to violence so quickly, right? Is that it's an incongruent understanding of the situation. But I mean, again, as I said about anger, I mean, if a person shows up and is going to be violent, you got to do something. You know what I mean? You can't just stand there and talk to them, while they're hitting you. You know what I mean? But I don't know if I answered your question, but I think you're completely correct when you had said, so you're talking about Socrates, Gabriel Marcel was a underappreciated Catholic philosopher, but he's I would just in relation to your question, two ideas, and it's one of these things where it's like when you hear it, when you hear it, it's sort of it's striking, right? And that is that uh, he talks about the generative power of commitment. And I think that it's interesting how when you commit yourself to something, even if that is just truth and goodness, or however you want to characterize it, commit yourself to being a loyal person in relation to something,
Yes.
that it's like combining these wills to power. And when you combine these wills to power, it does create something new, right? It does generate something new. But the other thing he talks about is, excuse me, is creative sacrifice. And I think that this again brings us full circle. This idea that, well, just as you are called to turn toward being, you could say that in regard to that karmic flow, we find ourselves in a world that is a certain way, right? And that in order, if we are called in order to be the right way, or to do the right thing in that world, that there may be a sense in which, of course, we're being called to our own death, right? And so there is some sense in which it's like, well, on the one hand, it's like, well, I am expending my life anyway, right? Like I am going to die anyway. I'm always already in the throe of death, right? And so the idea is that, but just as we had said with the chariot, just as it's possible to like take hold of your own most potential, to take hold of your own being in your own way, it is possible to direct that thrownness toward death. So the idea is that I can say to myself something like, well, I choose to do this, but my choosing to do this is going to lead to my death. But I can counteract any of the anxiety that comes from that thought by saying that, but I'm going to die anyway, right? I'm going to die anyway. There's this great passage in Nietzsche where he says that if you're thinking that I need to survive at all costs, and I think he's very specific when he uses that phrase, right? Because it brings in this idea of money. But if I think to myself that I need to survive at all costs, that is a kind of despair, that is like deep inauthenticity, right? Because the idea is that you're going to die anyway. And forgive me just to really quickly mention this. I used to work in a trauma center. I watched so many people die when I was like 19 years old. And when I first started seeing, and really traumatic deaths, like people being beheaded and stuff like that, and when I first saw this stuff, like it just like, it wakes you up very fast. I'm just like, well, this was just a person who was out riding their motorcycle, you know what I mean? Like with their 8-year-old daughter. I mean, you know what I mean? And then it's like, now their life's over, and that kind of stuff. And so I think that when you start to realize that existence is mysterious, right? Like I know that I'm thrown toward death, but I don't know when death will arrive. I don't know when I will arrive at my own death. I think that that makes you anxious, but I think that you can take hold of that process, right? You can take hold of that by saying something like, well, I know that I am mortal, and as opposed to just being like, I'm a spectator in the world and I'm going to live as long as I can to experience as much as I can, which, you can't even remember it, right? But it's like, instead of surviving at all costs, I can use my life force, so to speak. I can use my life force to make a contribution to the world, right? And I don't mean this in terms of worldliness, in terms of legacy, kind of thing, but I mean more along the lines of like, no, just that like, here I am existing now. I am free in the face of my own mortality, and in the face of the mystery of existence. What am I called to do? And I think that you don't want to willy-nilly. I'm not talking about like just kamikaze for the thrill of it or something. But I think this idea of not standing up for what is right, because it could lead to some sort of harm to you, some sort of personal harm. I think that's inauthentic. That's the wrong idea. You know what I mean? That even if it leads to some kind of personal harm, I feel like this is the last thought, just real quick, is that I feel like we had kind of talked about this, in a different context, but this idea, or different time, but this idea that, like, hey, however winning is characterized at this particular moment, you might win, right? You might win this battle, but the idea is something like, but I'm going to harm you in the process. You know what I mean? Like, I'm going to slow down this evil, for lack of a better way to put it. Yeah.
It's not about an ego thing. It's about a person and the individual looking at, reflecting and being able to look at their views of justice, their virtue, their goodness in a way, and everything that's authentic in the search, and just being it, basically.
I think that's exactly right. It's a difficult thing to do. I mean, it's not easy. This idea that, I mean, when you listen to the sages, when you listen to these philosophers, and they're saying things like, and I love the Eastern stuff as well. The samurai, it's like, but this idea of constantly being ready to die. I mean, that's heavy. I mean, that's very difficult. I mean, like, even when I'm like writing a book, or even when I'm making these philosophemes, you know what I mean? It's like, I get excited about them, and I'm like, I want to see it out to the end. You know what I mean? Like, we were just talking about this with my friends from New York the other day. It's like, well, it's like, I get anxious, right? It's like, I get anxious that I don't have enough time, but it's like, you can only do what you can do, I feel like it's very difficult. It's very difficult to be ready to die, to be able to die at any moment. That's difficult. But I think that that is sincerity, right? That is sincerity. So you could say something like this, is that, like, but I can't be doing everything right now. I can only be doing one thing, right? So, I mean, these Buddhists, when they say, if you're making a cup of tea, then just make a cup of tea, right? Like that's to sincerely make a cup of tea. And so it's like, well, I am only truly here now, right? This is, I mean, yes, all this preparation has enabled me and my will to power in this moment. But if I'm only truly here now, then the idea is that if I'm allowing my mind to be in all these other places, then there is some sense in which I'm just turning away from true being, right? I mean, like,
to the world of despair.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, if these are the cards that I'm dealt, then these are the cards I'm dealt. I can't. There's nothing else. There's nothing I can do about that.
Man, dude, great stuff, Frankie. The anxiety piece here. It's like the most common word used probably out of all these. It's a hot button. Yeah, me and you probably both. It sounds like you deal with anxiety a little bit. We know I deal with anxiety. And let me just say, me and Frank spent the whole weekend together. Didn't feel anxious one bit. Hung out, smoked some pot. It was fantastic. But this anxiety piece, Frankie, how does this come into it?
So anxiety, from the point of view of just a principle, right? Anxiety, I mean, I think that I find all of these principles to be very interesting. I love existentialism. I wouldn't have spent so much time thinking about it otherwise. But anxiety is a very peculiar principle, right? So the way that, and again, what I was trying to do is, I'm just trying to see it as it is, right? I'm not trying to be like, I want it to be this way, I want it to be that way. I was just trying to see it as it is, right? And so it seemed to me that anxiety is a kind of bridging principle. I take it as constitutional, but it seems like it's kind of bridging the constitutional and the actualization principles, because the idea here is that you can use anxiety. I mean, I don't want to get into too much of an egotistical kind of way of talking about it, but to just make it move fast, I'll say you can use anxiety as fuel, right? So the idea is something like the anxiety that is naturally there, even though it's almost universally understood as a kind of bad thing, right? I mean, people are out there getting medicated for it all the time, right? But the idea is that it is possible to use that. It's a kind of power, right? It's a kind of power. It might be chaotic power, but it can be used to push yourself higher in terms of the actualization. It can be used to direct yourself into the actualization. So the idea is that on the one hand, it's kind of inescapable. So just to be thrown into the world is to find yourself anxious. I think that there's lots of different reasons. There's lots of different reasons. Let me just look at. I just want to see which real quick. Forgive me. I just want to see which slide. I thought there was a slide that. Okay, so let me see if this is. Okay. So that's the only slide. I'm sorry. This is okay. So here it is. So I thought there was a slide that I had something else on this slide, but so the idea is that it's a threefold idea. So I'm thrown into the world and I am anxious because I am with others, right? So all of this social anxiety stuff is just a natural part of being in the world. I mean, I'm thrown in the world with others, and also that involves my identity, right? Like I'm anxious about how I understand myself. I'm also, I guess the other way, it'd be the other way around, is that I'm anxious about how others understand me. This is why there's, I mean, we're at the level, of course, we're at the level of feeling very strongly about things like what pronoun you use to refer to me, right? So so it's like this social identity. Like I'm anxious about that. Like, I mean, it's something that I care about, right? Like, so we could say that just anxiety about having an identity, in the world. And then in addition to all of that, there is the anxiety of my own mortality, right? So I mean, I'm also I'm going to die. I mean, impermanence, we could say, the anxiety around impermanence. I experience impermanence all the time, right? So it's like just the loss of, I mean, even if it's just like, I mean, I mourned, right? I mean, it's like when you were out here, we had such a good time when you were out here. Sometimes I'll walk out in the yard and I'll be like, oh, I remember that night when Scott was here, we had such a good time, right?
Same thing, bro. It's so funny.
Yeah. But it's interesting because it's like, but that's an event that has passed, right? So then there's a sense in which it's like, well, it's because everything is impermanent, right? I mean, you can't hang on to any of these things in the world, so to speak. So anyway, but I think that's natural anxiety, right? There's anxiety around all of these things, and so then the idea is that when well, I guess the three things I was looking for are inside the parentheses. So it's existing, being in time, having an identity, and then being mortal. So the idea is that there's natural anxiety, but that anxiety, going back to what we were talking about in terms of the call, it's through that anxiety that we're called. Right. So that's why, and I understand there's always extreme examples, like people could come in with these extreme examples and use them against me. But, if barring the extreme examples, because I gotta deal with the other stuff first, and then we can talk about extreme examples if you want. But barring the extreme examples, the idea is something like the anxiety is not to be resolved in terms of worldliness. Right. So the idea is that you can't, there's not something that you can do in the world to fix your mortality. I mean, you just can't. I mean, it's like trying to find a corner in a round room. It's just not going to happen, So, so the idea is that, again, instead of looking at what is illuminated by the light, we want to turn and become more intimate with the light. We want to turn and gain a greater awareness of the presence of the light. Yeah. So, you know what? I just realized something. Can I give me 1 second here?
Yeah,
Is that okay?
Frank.
Okay.
Come
Give me
on,
1
bro.
second. All right. So I think that's ultimately that's the answer to the question. So I've sometimes referred to this as there's this idea in Plato. It comes from Plato's Symposium. It's called the ladder of love, or the Scala Amoris. And the idea with that is that it is possible to there it is. Okay. The idea is that it is possible. So this was the one I was looking at was an earlier version. There was just a typo. There was just one typo in it, but there it is. That's why I thought there was 3 at the bottom. So now you can see that there they are. There you are. So this is the corrected version. It's essentially the same thing, but this is the corrected version. I didn't even realize that I had 2 of the same bullet points in there until once I saw that. I was like, oh, this was an earlier the version of the PowerPoint. So this is the one so here it is. So forgive me for that. But so this idea of the Scala Amoris for Plato, so Plato does this in terms of love. And I think Christianity clearly uses this philosophy to understand various Christian doctrines and Christian ideas. But so for Plato, the idea is that when you're first embodied, this is eros, right? So we've got eros, from eros to philia. This is the path of becoming a philosopher, or in this existential philosophy, you could call it in terms of turning toward the source, turning toward becoming authentic. For Plato, when you're first embodied, everything is about the carnal, right? And so there's some sense in which your understanding of love, for example, your understanding of love is in terms of bodies in the Symposium, right? You see this sort of this ladder, as everyone gives their discourse on what is love in Plato's Symposium. You see this sort of ladder. We're moving up this sort of ladder, and so until we arrive at Socrates's contribution to the conversation, and when he talks about his conversation with Diotima. And so the idea here is that this turning away from the carnal toward the condition for the possibility of the carnal can also be understood in terms of love. And so the idea is that initially we love bodies, then we love forms. So Plato says that what you want to do is you want to come to love souls, right? So you want to love another being because of their soul, more so than their body, right? So this isn't to say that it's that you can't love bodies, but that first and foremost you want to love the soul. And so that suggests a kind of movement, right? And it's that same sort of movement in regard to psychomachia. It's the same sort of movement in terms of self-actualization. And so the same thing's going on with anxiety, right? And I think that you can see that I'm anxious about my being in the world. And that entails a way of acting, that entails a way of choosing, that entails a way of thinking. And once I can get hold of that, right? And the way that it seems to me, we're doing philosophy here, right? So it's like the way to get a hold of that is through thinking, right? So the first thing has to be this recognition that there are alternative ways to relate to what is provoking or invoking anxiety in me. And once we begin to recognize these alternatives, then there's a sense in which I can change my relation. Once I change my relation, it's the same change of relation in the Scala Amoris. It's the same change of relation in eudaimonia. It's the same change of relation in authenticity, toward the moment of vision and away from being fallen into the world. It's all that same mechanism and or function. So the idea being is that by way of anxiety, I'm anxious because I'm in the world, so to speak. And so by way of that anxiety, I can use it to take hold of the being that is the condition for the possibility of my being in the world, because the being that is the condition for the possibility of my being in the world is more powerful than the anxiety that comes from my being in the world.
And when you start kind of taking control of your life and deciding I'm going to live X way or whatever, the anxiety subsides. And I personally think there's
Yes.
always some sort of lesson to be learned, and not let's say I guess there is lessons to be learned, the mortality, anxiety, and the committing to yourself, but also like just the things you fear. Like I had stage fright, and I was like, there's so many lessons there to be learned. It's not like, listen, you get courageous, you get all that good stuff in the material, but then like you learn something about yourself. Like why? Like for me, it was worrying about what others think of me. It's like, oh shit. And then you're down this path. It's just, and it's so funny you said what the Plato said about soul versus body, because this is like everything you say, Frank, about Plato and these guys. It's like, I've always felt this way and I just can't articulate it. And I can't, like, it's like, I must've been an existentialist in a previous life, because like, that's all my boys. Every time you meet these girls, like, Scott's gonna go for the most soulful one. Cause I look at people's soul, even now, even women, people in general, I'm looking at your soul. Cause I think that's what's the most important compared to the body, or where you know, what do you do? What do you make? Whatever.
That's great. That's great. People like Socrates nowadays. So you had mentioned Socrates. I just got two things to say about this.
Sure.
Is that the one is that I love Plato. so right. So it's like, I just, they say Aristotle, these neat little phrases, right? So Aristotle is the master of those who know. They say that Aristotle is the master of those who know, but they say that Plato is divine. And I've got a lot of friends out there who would say that I need to give a shout out to Pythagoras, right? But for me, I'm sure, well, according to Plato and Xenophon, it seems like Socrates was a really great guy, but I just love Plato so much. That's why I'm always talking about Plato instead of, in fact, I just put together a philosophy where the unexamined life is not worth living. And of course, that's supposedly something that Socrates said at his trial. And so, but that comes out of the Apology, out of Plato's dialogue, yes. The Apology. So I always quote Plato, but I guess technically it would be true to say that it's Socrates who said that, but I'm always talking about Plato. Yeah.
Man, Frankie, this was unreal, dude. What a nice little episode we got here, dude. Thank you so much. And I think, dude, I feel like we crushed this, man.
Yeah, no, this was really wonderful. I really appreciate being able to talk about these things on your show, and hopefully I'm going to get mine off the ground here very soon. So hopefully there'll be more of this kind of content on my channel.
Dude, you got it. Just keep doing it. I mean, listen, I'll tell everybody behind the scenes, like Frank is you guys think I work hard. Frank makes me look like dog shit. Dude's working 8 to 10 hours a week on these goddamn things, banging out these videos. So everybody check out the Instagram first, because that's up and running the philosophy. I'm going to link that below. And then if you're in the future, if you're watching this past September, I would give Frank till September, check out the Philosophy YouTube channel. And more episodes from me and Frank, because Frank, you just have a really, most intellectuals, I feel like they like to like show off, and you try to go out of you don't want to show off at all. You want the opposite. So you probably are the weirdo in the intellectual groups. So it's cool, man.
No, it's true. Well, it's funny, and if I could just say two things, because
there you go, man.
But just two quick. The one thing is that it's interesting because and this was exactly what we were just talking about in regard to the anxiety. So it's like, well, so on the one hand, I want to say you can use that anxiety. I encourage people to think about this, right? It's like, you can use that anxiety to help you. So for example, when, so I think a lot of people, they're like, oh, I'm anxious, right? I'm anxious, something's wrong. Mm-hmm. And they don't go anywhere from there. It's just like, something's wrong, I need help. Right. And it's like, well, I'm encouraging them to sort of, it's like Suzuki says, when you're sitting in the middle of your problem, what's more real to you, you or your problem? But so I'm encouraging them to use that anxiety because, for example, anxiety in regard to being among others or being with others, and anxiety in regard to my own mortality. You had just said this. It's like, well, I think you are absolutely right that intellectuals love to show off, professors love to show how smart they are. And it's funny to me that you say this, because this is what has sort of prompted me, is that I have anxiety. I have anxiety because of the things I'm not saying, right? So it's like I think to myself, okay, so I should be using more German terms. I should be using more Greek terms. I should be pointing out the exact passage, the exact page that these quotes are coming from, like all these sorts of academic, like rigorous academic things, but what I'm finding is that a lot of that stuff, I mean, don't get me wrong, some of that stuff is really important. This is why I personally think, I find a lot of people on the internet just kind of like making things up and then attributing them to whoever they want. Like, they're doing this all the time with Freud. They're like, Freud thinks that, kitty cats are, lovely or something like this. I'm like, what are you talking about? Where did Freud say that? But maybe probably when he was all coked up, but it's like, my thought is that a certain amount of that stuff is necessary. You got to do certain things, but it's funny because I'm anxious, because like I think to myself, well, when professors listen to this stuff, I'm thinking of how critical they will be, right? But at the same time, you can't let and let them be critical. Let them be critical, right? The idea is that you can't let the anxiety about how critical somebody might be, you can't let that stop you. You can't let that, as Deleuze says, and he's talking about Nietzsche, he says that the way that passive forces overcome active forces is by keeping them from doing what they're able to do, right? So the idea is that the way that nihilism conquers us is by getting in between you and what you can do. It's by getting in between you and your own power, right? And again, another way to say that is it's by getting in between you and how you play your cards. The cards are dealt to you. You've got your cards. There's nothing you can do about it. You can't get new cards, right? So the idea is that you got to play those cards, and if the anxiety is stopping you from playing those cards, well, then that's how it won, right? That's how the nihilism has defeated you. So anyway, there's this idea that, but going back to the positive side of this, right? It's like, well, and this is the last thing I'll say about it, is that you can use that anxiety to help you, right? So you can say to yourself, like, okay, for example, sometimes I will have finished some little project and I'll think to myself, like, well, I should have improved it here. I should have improved it there, and I'll be like, but I don't really want to work anymore. You know what I mean? Like, I just want to turn on a movie and just, like, you know what I mean? Like, I just want to stare at the wall. I don't want to do any more work. Like, I'm working all the time, but then I'll tell myself, I'm like, oh, well, like this is a substandard, whatever, what I mean? Like, I criticize myself and then, and use that. I mean, but it's in a loving sort of way so that I can go back and do a little bit more work. I just did that with the Plato philosophemes, and I'm so happy that I did that, because there's all this video editing. I am new to this world of video editing, right? And there's all this video editing that had to be done, and it's very, it can be tedious. I mean, like sometimes it's like, it takes me 3 days. It takes me like 3 days of just straight working, you know what I mean, to like just get these videos just right. And it took a long time to get to that point. But anyway, the point is that after I made myself anxious, then I used that anxiety to throw myself toward the work. Then I did more work, and after I did the work, I was like, I'm really glad that I did the work. I'm happy with it. And I do the exact same thing with books. I sometimes I look back now and I'm like, I can't believe, and in all sincerity and humility, I'm like, I can't believe how many books I've written. I mean, I feel like I still remember this moment when I was like, I hope I write a book. You know what I mean? Like, and I look back now and I think, man, I wrote so many books. But they asked me, my friends from New York just last weekend asked me, they said, well, what are you thinking? What do you think to get yourself to write? What do you think to like get yourself to finish these projects, to write these books? And I told him, I said, I'll tell you the truth. And this is the truth. I tell myself, I say, I'm going to die. That's what I tell myself. I'm like, I'm going to die, and I got to get this done before I die. And the idea is I make myself anxious. I get this surge of like, oh my God, I'm going to die. Right. And then I'm like, okay, I got to get this done, and that's how it, so what's the point of all of that? The point of all of that is that I know that there's a lot of people out there who are feeling a lot of anxiety. And what I'm saying is that I encourage you to think into that anxiety. I encourage you to sit with that anxiety, to think about where that anxiety is directed toward, what is driving that anxiety, but also just trying to be a friend to yourself, that eudaimonia piece, right? Like not fighting with yourself constantly. And then when you begin to take hold of your own most potential like that, when you begin to take hold of it, notice that it's not necessarily a bad thing, because you can actually use it to help you. You can actually use it to help do things in the world. And that doesn't mean that your being is determined by the world. Your being can still be determined by being, but you can use that anxiety to help you take hold of your own most potential in order to be in the world, be authentic in the world.
What a great way to end it, Frank. Beautiful. Everybody check out Frank Scalambrino stuff below. As always, stay safe, stay positive, stay blessed. We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thanks.